My name is Nora Whitaker, and I was 34 years old when I learned my brother had been living as me for 11 years. Not pretending in some childish way. Not using my name once on a phone bill. I mean credit cards, car loans, medical debt, apartment leases, utilities, even a business line of credit. My life had been quietly stolen while my family called it loyalty. I found out on a rainy Monday morning inside a bank office that smelled like printer toner and expensive coffee. I had just applied for a mortgage on a small brick townhouse in Richmond, Virginia. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a cracked patio and a kitchen with yellow cabinets I already planned to repaint. It was supposed to be the beginning of my peaceful life. The loan officer clicked through my file, then stopped smiling. She looked at the screen, looked at me, and asked if I had recently filed for bankruptcy in Maryland. I laughed because I thought she had mixed me up with someone else. Then she asked about 3 maxed-out credit cards, 2 repossessions, unpaid rent, and a personal loan in collections. I remember staring at her mouth while she spoke because the words stopped making sense. Bankruptcy, default, charge-off, eviction, fraud alert missing. My ears rang like someone had shut a door underwater. I said, "That isn't me." She turned the monitor slightly, and there it was. My full legal name, my social security number, my date of birth. But the address was not mine. The phone number was not mine. The signature on one account looked like someone had copied my name, while angry. And the email address had my brother's childhood nickname in it. Den 1982. My brother's name was Dennis Whitaker, and in our family Dennis was the son who made mistakes. I was the daughter expected to clean them up. Before I tell you what Dennis said when I confronted him and what my mother begged me to sign so he would not lose everything, tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you are watching from. I want to know how far this story travels, because someone out there needs to hear this before their family turns their kindness into evidence against them. I left the bank without the mortgage approval, without the townhouse, and without the old version of myself who still believed my family's chaos could not reach me anymore. I sat in my car while rain slid down the windshield and pulled my credit report on my phone with shaking hands. Every page felt like opening a door to a room someone had trashed in my name. The first account was from 11 years earlier when I was 23 and living in Atlanta for nursing school. It was a store credit card opened at a furniture outlet in Baltimore. I had never been to that store. The purchase was a bedroom, set a television stand, and a mattress. I knew exactly who needed furniture that year. Dennis had moved into his first apartment. The second account was a utility bill, then a cell phone plan, then a used car loan for a black Dodge Charger. I remembered that car. Dennis drove it to Thanksgiving and parked sideways in our parents' driveway, like he was arriving at a movie premiere. My father had laughed and said, "Your brother finally figured out how to get ahead." I had smiled that day because I wanted to be happy for him. I had no idea the engine revving outside my parents' house was financed with my stolen name. That is the strange cruelty of identity theft inside a family. Strangers steal from you and disappear. Family steals from you and sits across the table, asking you to pass the salt. I called Dennis first. Not the police, not an attorney, not the credit bureaus. Dennis. That tells you how deeply I had been trained. Even with proof in my lap, my first instinct was still to give him a chance to explain. He answered on the 5th ring with music in the background and said, "What's up? Nor, I'm busy." I said, "Why is your email address on credit accounts under my name?" The music went quiet. Not off, just quieter, like someone had moved away from a speaker. Dennis did not ask what I meant. He did not sound confused. He sighed. A long, annoyed sigh, the kind people make when you interrupt them over something minor. Then he said, "Are we really doing this today?" That sentence told me everything. Not, "I don't know." Not, "That must be a mistake." Not, "Nora, I would never." Just irritation, as if I had discovered a dirty dish he left in the sink. My hand tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles hurt. I said, "You used my social security number." He laughed once. "Don't be dramatic. It was years ago." Years ago. As if time turned theft into family history. As if damage expired because he was tired of hearing about it. I asked how many accounts there were. He said, "I don't remember. Mom handled some of it." That was when the rain outside seemed to stop moving. My mother. I looked at the credit report again and saw the old addresses. My parents' house. Dennis's apartment. A rental near a mechanic shop where he used to work. The pattern was not random. It was organized. Someone had kept my information, shared it, reused it, and protected the lie. I hung up without saying goodbye. Then my phone rang immediately. Mom, of course. Dennis had called her before I could even process what he had admitted. I stared at her name on the screen and remembered every time she had told me I was the responsible one. Every time she said your brother just needs a little grace. My mother's voice was already shaking when I answered. Nora, sweetheart, before you get upset, you need to understand the situation. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because that was her gift. She could take a crime, wrap it in a soft blanket, and call it a situation. I said, "Did you know Dennis used my identity?" She started crying. That was her answer. My mother never cried first when she felt sorry. She cried first when she wanted control. He was desperate, she said. He had no credit. He needed a start. You were already doing so well. We thought it would be temporary. We. Not he. We. The word landed like a hammer. I asked, "Who is we?" She went quiet. In the background, I heard my father's recliner squeak. Then his voice, distant but clear, said, "Tell her not to make this ugly. Not ask if I was okay. Not ask how bad the damage was. Tell her not to make this ugly." That was my father's version of love. Silence until consequences arrived. My mother whispered, "Your father helped with the first application, just the first one. Dennis couldn't get approved, and you weren't using your credit anyway." I closed my eyes. I was in nursing school then, working nights, eating canned soup, studying anatomy at 3 a.m. They were using my clean future as a spare key. I said, "You stole my name." My mother gasped like I had cursed in church. "Do not say that. Families help each other." I looked at the bank folder on the passenger seat. My rejected mortgage application sat inside it like a death certificate for a life I had almost reached. "Helping requires consent," I said. "You never asked me." Her voice hardened. "Because you would have said no." There it was. The truth, plain and ugly. They had not misunderstood me. They had known exactly what my answer would be, so they removed my right to give it. That was the first time I understood that betrayal does not always come from hatred. Sometimes it comes from entitlement wearing a family name. I drove to my apartment in silence. I did not call anyone. I did not turn on music. I just kept seeing every family dinner from the last decade rearrange itself in my memory. Dennis complaining about bills while wearing new sneakers. Mom asking if I could be patient when he borrowed money. Dad telling me not to act superior because I had stable work. Stable work. I had worked 12-hour shifts in a cardiac unit while my brother was building debt in my name. I had skipped vacations, paid off student loans, driven the same dented Honda for 9 years, and checked my bank account before buying groceries. Meanwhile, my family watched me protect a credit score they had already destroyed behind my back. That night I printed every page of my credit report. I spread them across my kitchen table and used different colored highlighters. Yellow for accounts I had never opened, pink for addresses I had never lived at, blue for phone numbers connected to Dennis, green for accounts opened before I was even financially independent enough to understand the danger. By midnight, my table looked like a crime board without the string. I found a car loan from 2016, a payday loan from 2018, a medical credit account from 2019 for dental work. Dennis had gotten veneers that year. My mother had posted a photo online saying, "So proud of my handsome son and his new smile." I had commented with a heart. I threw up in the sink after that one, not because of the money. Money was part of it, but not the deepest wound. The deepest wound was realizing how many times I had loved people in public while they were using me in private. I had been clapping for a man who was standing on my neck. The next morning, Dennis sent a text. "Mom says you're freaking out. You need to calm down before you ruin my life." I stared at the words until they blurred. My ruined credit. My rejected mortgage. My stolen identity. His life. That was the family math I had grown up with. Dennis made the mess, and I became cruel for refusing to mop it. I did not respond. Instead, I called the bank officer and asked for copies of everything she could legally provide. Then I contacted the credit bureaus, froze my credit, and filed an identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission. The website asked whether I knew the person who had stolen my identity. I hovered over the answer longer than I should have. Yes, I knew him. I knew his favorite cereal. I knew the scar on his chin from falling off his bike when he was 7. I knew the way he smiled when he wanted forgiveness before confessing what he had done. I knew the exact tone he used when he called me dramatic. But knowing someone does not make their theft less real. By Friday, my mother had called 39 times. My father had left 4 voicemails. Dennis had sent 11 texts, each one angrier than the last. The first said I was overreacting. The third said I was trying to destroy him. The 7th said I owed him loyalty because he was my only brother. The 11th said, if I go down, Mom goes down too. That message changed everything. Until then, some tired part of me still wanted to believe my mother had been foolish, pressured, manipulated by Dennis. But Dennis knew exactly where the body was buried, and he was pointing at it. I screenshotted the text and put it in a folder named Evidence. It felt strange and powerful to give the truth a home. The first attorney I called said identity theft inside families could get complicated if I wanted criminal accountability. The second said the same thing but sounded bored. The third was named Patrice Bell, and when I told her my brother had used my identity for 11 years, she did not gasp. She said, then we start with paper. Paper tells the truth longer than people do. I met Patrice in a small office above a tax preparation company. She had short gray hair, red glasses, and the calm expression of someone who had seen families turn into court exhibits. I brought my credit report, screenshots, bank denial, FTC report, and every message from Dennis and my parents. Patrice read quietly for nearly 20 minutes. Then she looked up and said, Nora, this was not one mistake. I nodded because I already knew that, but hearing someone else say it made my chest loosen. She tapped the stack of papers. This is a pattern. Multiple accounts, multiple addresses, repeated benefit, and at least 2 relatives admitting knowledge. That gives you options. I asked what options meant. She said disputes, police report, fraud, affidavits, civil claims, if necessary, creditor notices, and protection against your family, pressuring you into accepting responsibility. I almost smiled at that last part. She had known my family for less than an hour, and already understood the next move. I said, they want me to keep it quiet. Patrice leaned back. Of course they do. Silence is the cheapest settlement. That sentence stayed with me. Silence is the cheapest settlement. My family had been paying for their comfort with my silence since I was a child. I was the good daughter because I swallowed, the mature one because I absorbed, the loyal one because I disappeared. 2 days later, my parents asked me to come for Sunday dinner, not invited. Asked in the same tone people use when a meeting is mandatory. My mother wrote, we need to settle this as a family before outsiders get involved. Outsiders. She meant attorneys, banks, police, anyone who would not cry on command when she said the word brother. I almost ignored it, but Patrice said, if you go, do not go alone emotionally. Bring your phone, keep the conversation lawful, and do not sign anything. Then she paused and added, people who ask for family meetings after fraud usually want a witness-free confession from the victim. That sentence made my stomach cold. I went because some part of me needed to see their faces, while they explained why my future had been acceptable collateral. Their house looked exactly the same as it always had. White shutters, 2 hanging ferns. A porch swing my father built when we were kids. From the outside, nothing suggested the people inside had been laundering guilt through me for 11 years. Dennis's truck was in the driveway. A new one, black polished, expensive. I looked at it and wondered whose name had helped buy it. When I walked in, my mother rushed toward me with open arms. I stepped back. Her face crumpled instantly, not with grief, but with embarrassment, because Dennis and my father were watching. My father sat at the head of the dining table with a folder in front of him, like he was chairing a board meeting. Dennis leaned against the counter, eating chips from the bag. He looked older than I remembered, softer around the jaw, but his smirk was the same. Finally, he said, maybe now we can stop acting like I murdered somebody. I looked at him and said, you stole my identity for 11 years. He rolled his eyes. Here we go. My mother put a hand to her chest. Nora, please. Your brother made mistakes, but he never meant to hurt you. I looked at the folder in front of my father. Then why did everyone hide it? No one answered. That was how I knew the meeting was not about truth. It was about containment. My father cleared his throat and opened the folder. We have a practical solution. He slid a paper across the table. I did not touch it. The title read, Statement of Family Financial Understanding. Even the name sounded like a lie, wearing a tie. My father said, You sign this, and it confirms that Dennis used your information with your verbal permission during a difficult period. I stared at him. My own father had typed a document asking me to confess, to consenting to my own theft. My mother whispered, It's just to keep him out of trouble while we work things out. Dennis tossed another chip into his mouth. It's not a big deal. Once you sign, I can refinance some stuff and start cleaning it up. I turned to him slowly. You want me to sign a legal statement saying I gave you permission? He shrugged. You're acting like you never helped me before. That was the misunderstanding they wanted to build the whole lie on. I had helped Dennis before. I had lent him money. I had paid for groceries once when his paycheck was late. I had covered a phone bill when his line was about to be cut off. In their minds, every act of kindness became retroactive consent for whatever they took next. I said helping you with groceries is not permission to use my social security number. My father's jaw tightened. Do not speak to us like we're criminals. I looked at the paper again. Then stop handing me evidence. Dennis slammed the chip bag down. You are so dramatic. This is why nobody tells you anything. There it was. The title of my life in that family, dramatic. Dramatic meant I remembered. Dramatic meant I objected. Dramatic meant I had a boundary where they expected a donation. I pulled my phone from my purse and placed it on the table. I am not signing anything. And from now on, all communication goes through my attorney. My mother made a sound like I had slapped her. Attorney Nora, how could you bring a lawyer into this family? I said. Dennis brought creditors into my name. Dad brought a false statement to the table. You brought tears. I brought protection. For once my voice did not shake. That scared them more than shouting would have. Dennis stepped closer. If you file anything official, I could lose my job. I looked at him. You should have thought about that before committing fraud. My mother started crying harder. He has children. Dennis did not have custody of his 2 kids, but my mother used them whenever she needed him to look softer. I said, Then they deserve a father who stops stealing. My father stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. Enough. You will not destroy your brother over paperwork. Paperwork. 11 years of debt lies, denials, signatures, and stolen numbers reduced to paperwork. I picked up my purse. That paperwork is the only reason I know the truth. As I reached the door, my mother grabbed my sleeve. Her fingers dug into my wrist, the way they did when I was a teenager, and she wanted me to smile for church photos. If you do this, she whispered, you will break this family. I looked down at her hand, then back at her face. No, Mom. I am just refusing to be the glue. I drove home shaking, but not from fear. Something old was leaving my body. The belief that their panic was my emergency. The belief that my brother's consequences were my responsibility. The belief that peace meant letting my family keep both the knife and the story about how I walked into it. By the time I reached my apartment, I was crying and smiling at the same time. The next morning, Patrice filed the first round of disputes and prepared letters to every creditor connected to the fraudulent accounts. She told me to file a police report. I sat in the parking lot of the station for 20 minutes before going inside. It is one thing to say your brother stole from you. It is another to hand his name to an officer. The officer at the desk asked if I wanted to proceed even though the suspect was family. Even though. That phrase told me how often people backed away at this exact moment. I thought about the townhouse I had lost. I thought about Dennis calling me dramatic. I thought about my father sliding that false statement across the table. Yes, I said. I want to proceed. The officer nodded and began typing. My voice sounded strange as I answered questions. Dates, accounts, addresses, names. Did I give permission? No. Did I benefit from the accounts? No. Did I know who used the information? Yes. Each answer felt like cutting a rope tied around my ribs. By the end of the week, my family had changed tactics. They stopped calling me privately and started performing publicly. My mother posted a vague message online about heartbreak, when one child chooses revenge over forgiveness. Aunt Celia commented, "Some daughters forget who held them as babies." My cousin Mark wrote, "Money ruins people. None of them knew the details, but they knew their assigned lines. Dennis posted nothing at first. Then he shared a quote about loyalty being rare and captioned it, "Learning who's real." I wanted to comment with screenshots of his email address on my fraudulent accounts. Patrice told me not to. "Let them talk," she said. "People who think they control the story often create better evidence than you could ask for." So I saved everything, every post, every comment, every message from relatives telling me to forgive. One aunt wrote, "Your brother has always struggled. You were blessed with stability. Why not share it?" I replied once with a single sentence. He shared my identity without asking. She did not respond. The next day, my mother deleted her post. But Dennis did not stop. 3 days later, my manager called me into her office. I worked as a charge nurse at a rehabilitation hospital, and my job depended on trust documentation and professional judgment. My manager's face was careful when I sat down. "Nora," she said, "I received an email from someone claiming to be your brother." My stomach dropped. She turned the monitor toward me. Dennis had written that I was unstable, vindictive, and falsely accusing him because of a family disagreement over money. He implied I had access to patient information and might misuse records if I felt emotional. The email was clumsy, but it was dangerous. He had reached for my career because I protected my credit. For one moment, I could not breathe. Then something settled over me colder than anger. Dennis had not used my identity because he was desperate. He used it because he believed my life was available. My credit, my name, my reputation, my job. All of it in his mind belonged to the family pile he could grab from whenever he wanted. My manager said I do not believe this, but I needed to document that it was received. I thanked her, walked to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and shook until my knees hurt. Then I sent the email to Patrice. Her reply came fast. "This is retaliation. Do not respond to him. We escalate today." That afternoon, Patrice sent cease and desist letters to Dennis, my parents, and 2 relatives who had repeated accusations online. She also notified the creditors that I had filed a police report and identity theft affidavit. Then she said the sentence that changed the whole case. "Nora, I want to look at your childhood records." I asked why. Patrice said, "The first fraudulent account was opened when you were 23, but your father had your social security number and helped with the first application. I want to know whether this started earlier." I told her that was impossible. My parents were controlling, but they would not have opened accounts when I was a child. Even as I said it, I heard how weak it sounded. That weekend, I went through an old plastic storage bin in my closet. It held school certificates, birthday cards, tax forms from old jobs, and a folder my grandmother had given me before she died. On the tab she had written Nora, important. I had never opened it carefully because I thought it was sentimental. Inside were copies of savings, bonds, letters, and one handwritten note. My grandmother had written, "If your mother ever tells you not to check your own records, check twice." I sat on the floor with the note in my hand and felt the room tilt. Beneath it was a copy of a credit freeze brochure from years earlier with a sticky note attached. "For Nora, when she is old enough." Harold dismissed me. Harold was my father. My grandmother had known something. Maybe not everything, but enough to be worried. At the bottom of the folder was a bank letter addressed to my parents when I was 16. It referenced a custodial savings account in my name. I had never heard of that account. I took photos of everything and sent them to Patrice. On Monday, Patrice called. Her voice was calm but tighter than usual. "Nora, your grandmother left you money in a custodial account. Not a fortune, but enough to matter. We need statements." I sat down slowly. My grandmother had died when I was 19. My parents told me she left sentimental things, not money. Dennis received her car supposedly because he needed transportation. The next week, records began arriving. My grandmother had deposited money for my education. Withdrawals started shortly after her death. Some went to tuition payments, but not mine. Dennis had attended a private automotive program for 1 semester before dropping out. One withdrawal matched the exact date he bought tools he later pawned. Another matched a payment on his first apartment. I stared at the records until the numbers blurred. The identity theft was not the beginning. It was the sequel. My family had been using my name and resources before I even understood what credit was. Dennis had not invented the system. He inherited it. My parents had taught him that Nora's future was a family emergency fund. Patrice said, This gives us leverage. I said it gives me nausea. She softened. Both can be true. That was something I was learning. You can be devastated and strategic. You can grieve and still file on time. You can love the memory of who you wished your family was, while protecting yourself from who they have proven to be. The real twist came from Dennis's ex-wife, Megan. She called me from a blocked number one night and said, "I heard what's happening. You need to know about the storage unit." I almost hung up because I barely knew her, and my family had always described her as bitter. Funny how families call every woman bitter once she stops being useful. Megan told me Dennis kept old paperwork in a storage unit outside Glen Allen. Boxes from my parents' attic, old tax forms, copies of IDs, mail, loan papers. She said she had seen a folder with my name on it years ago. When she asked about it, Dennis said Nora doesn't care. She lets Mom handle that stuff. My skin went cold. Patrice advised me not to go anywhere near the unit myself. Instead, the information went to the investigating officer. A warrant did not happen overnight, but Dennis made things easier because people like him always do. He stopped paying the storage bill. The company contacted him. My father finally sent a notice to an old email tied to one fraudulent account. That notice helped connect the unit to the case. When the contents were eventually reviewed through the proper legal process, the folder existed. My folder. Copies of my social security card, an old student ID tax documents, bank letters, a copy of my nursing license, and printed account applications with signatures that were not mine. There was also a handwritten list in my mother's script. Use Nora address if needed. Do not call her job. Dennis phone. Harold backup. I read the scanned copy in Patrice's office and felt something inside me go silent. My mother had not been a frightened parent helping a desperate son one time. She had been the administrator of my erasure. Patrice sat across from me and said nothing for a while. Good attorneys know when legal advice is too small for the moment. Finally, she said, "I am sorry. Not sorry as a strategy. Not sorry before asking me to forgive. Just sorry." I cried then, not loudly, but in a way that seemed to come from somewhere older than my body. The case moved faster after that. Creditors began removing accounts from my report. Some requested more documentation. Some dragged their feet. Patrice pushed. The police contacted Dennis. My parents suddenly wanted another family meeting. This time I refused. My mother wrote, "You are letting strangers turn you against your blood." I replied, "My blood kept copies." Dennis was charged later than I wanted, and sooner than he expected. Identity theft, fraud-related counts, and additional issues tied to false statements. My parents were not immediately charged the same way, but they were named in documentation, and that terrified them more than anything. Their reputation had always mattered more than their conscience. Then came the final performance. My mother showed up at my hospital, not at the front desk, not quietly. She waited near the employee entrance at shift change, wearing the blue coat she wore to church and holding a folder against her chest. When she saw me, she rushed forward and said loudly, "Nora, please, your brother might go to jail." People turned. Nurses. Physical therapists. A security guard. My face burned, but my voice stayed steady. "You cannot be here." She started crying. "He made mistakes, but prison will ruin him. You can still fix this. You can tell them you gave permission years ago and forgot. People forget things. You work too much. You were stressed." There it was. The new lie. Not that Dennis was innocent, that I was forgetful enough to make his guilt disappear. My mother opened the folder and pulled out another statement, cleaner than the first, probably written by someone who knew just enough legal language to be dangerous. "Just sign this," she whispered. "Save your brother." I looked at the paper, then at her. "Did you save me when he ruined my credit?" Her mouth trembled. "You recovered. You always recover." That sentence hit harder than any insult. You always recover. How many times had they used my strength as permission to hurt me? How many times had survival been mistaken for consent? Security stepped closer. My mother noticed and lowered her voice. "If Dennis goes to prison, your father may not survive the shame," I said. "Then Dad should have survived telling the truth." Her face changed. The tears stopped so fast it was almost frightening. "You have become cruel," she said. I shook my head. "No, I have become documented. That line spread through my workplace faster than the scene itself. Not because I wanted drama, but because witnesses matter. My manager filed an incident report. Security noted the attempted contact. Patrice added it to the case. My mother had come to pressure me into signing a false statement at my job. Another page, another proof, another brick in the wall. By the time we entered mediation for the civil side of the mess, I was no longer the woman who sat crying in the bank parking lot. I was tired, yes. Angry, absolutely. But I was also clear. The meeting took place in a downtown office with glass walls and a table too shiny for the ugliness placed on it. Dennis arrived with an attorney, and the expression of a man who still believed consequences were negotiations. My parents came too, though they were advised not to speak much. My father looked smaller. My mother looked offended. Dennis would not meet my eyes. Patrice sat beside me with a binder organized by year. The mediator began with neutral language. Harm, resolution, family complexity. I listened politely until Dennis's attorney suggested that perhaps there had been informal permission because I had helped my brother financially in the past. Patrice opened the binder and placed the first forged application on the table, then the second. Then the list in my mother's handwriting. Informal permission does not explain 11 years of concealed accounts, Patrice said. It does not explain forged signatures. It does not explain retaliation at Miss Whitaker's workplace. It does not explain a storage unit containing her identity documents. The room went quiet. Dennis stared at the table. My mother stared at me like I had betrayed her by keeping evidence of her betrayal. Then Dennis finally spoke. I was drowning, he said. His voice cracked just enough to sound human. Nobody helped me. I looked at him for a long moment. I helped you for years. He shook his head. Not enough. There it was. The hunger under everything. Not enough. No matter what I gave, it became the floor for what he expected next. I said, you did not need help, you needed access. Dennis's jaw tightened. My mother whispered, Nora, please. I turned to her. No. You do not get to please your way out of this. My father flinched. Maybe because he had never heard me speak to her without asking permission from the room first. The settlement terms were not cinematic. Real justice rarely arrives with thunder. Dennis had to acknowledge in writing that he opened and used accounts without my consent. He had to cooperate with creditor investigations, repay what could be traced to him, and accept the criminal process without asking me to change my statement. My parents had to acknowledge their role in providing my information. They also had to return the remaining money from my grandmother's account, plus an additional amount negotiated through civil claims. It was not enough to buy back 11 years of damage. No amount would be. But it was enough to restore the record. Enough to say on paper that the version of reality I had lived was true. My mother cried when she signed. My father signed silently. Dennis signed last, pressing the pen so hard it tore the paper. Then he looked at me and said, I hope you're happy. I thought about the townhouse, the bank office, the hospital entrance, my grandmother's note. No, I said. I am not happy. I am free. Afterward, my credit did not heal overnight. That is something people do not understand. Even when you are right, even when you have reports and affidavits and attorneys, the system moves like cold syrup. I spent months making calls, uploading documents, correcting addresses, reopening disputes, explaining again and again that no, I had never lived in Maryland. No, I had not bought that car. But little by little the lies came off. One account removed, then another. Then the bankruptcy notation corrected after proof showed it was tied to fraudulent filings and not my financial behavior. My score rose in slow, stubborn steps. Every point felt like reclaiming a room in a house someone had occupied without permission. Dennis eventually pleaded to charges that kept the worst uncertainty away, but still marked his record permanently. He lost his job at the dealership. Not because I ruined him, but because employers tend to dislike fraud when the employee handles financing paperwork. My mother told relatives I had destroyed his career. Megan told them he had built it on stolen numbers. My father stopped speaking to me completely. His silence used to scare me. Now it felt like an unpaid bill I was no longer responsible for. My mother sent one letter 6 pages long explaining that she had only tried to keep the family together. She wrote, "You were always the strong one, and Dennis was fragile." I folded the letter and placed it in the evidence box beside the first false statement. Strong and fragile. The oldest excuse. One child is declared strong so everyone can take from her without guilt. Another is declared fragile so every harm he causes becomes someone else's responsibility. My mother never understood that calling me strong did not make me less wounded. A year after the bank denied my mortgage, I applied again. Different lender, different house. This one was smaller than the townhouse I lost, but it had a porch with enough room for 2 chairs and a maple tree in the yard. When the approval came through, I did not scream. I sat at my kitchen table and cried quietly. Not because a house fixes everything. It does not. But approval meant my name belonged to me again. My signature meant my consent. My social security number was no longer a family tool passed around in emergencies. I signed the closing documents with a hand that barely shook, and when the agent handed me the keys, I thought of my grandmother. On moving day, my friend Leah brought pizza and a cheap bottle of sparkling cider. We ate on the floor because I did not have a dining table yet. She raised her plastic cup and said, "To Nora Whitaker, legal owner of her own life." I laughed so hard I almost spilled cider on the boxes, then I cried again because it was true. My family did not disappear from my mind just because I blocked their numbers. Healing is not a door you close once. It is a lock you check on hard nights. Sometimes I still hear Dennis saying, "Don't be dramatic." Sometimes I hear my mother saying, "You always recover." Sometimes I wonder who I might have been if my family had protected me instead of spending me. But I do not wonder whether I did the right thing. That question is settled. If someone uses your name without permission, they are not borrowing. They are stealing. If someone asks you to lie so they can avoid consequences, they are not asking for forgiveness. They are asking for access to harm you again. People say families should get second chances. Maybe. But second chances require truth. They require accountability. They require the person who hurt you to stop calling your pain an inconvenience. My brother did not want a second chance. He wanted the first lie restored. My parents did not want peace. They wanted the paperwork to disappear. So here is what I learned. A stolen identity is not just numbers and accounts. It is stolen sleep, stolen trust, stolen opportunity, stolen time. And when the thief is family, the debt becomes emotional too, because everyone expects you to pay twice. Once with your credit and again with your silence. If your family only loves you when your name is useful, your money is available, and your pain stays quiet, then what they are protecting is not love. It is access. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is freeze your credit file, the report, keep the receipts, and let the people who called you dramatic explain their signatures to someone who does not share their last name.